Hello and good morning, Derrick.
Good morning, Ben.
How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. I have this feeling that someone's listening to us.
There's like a third person in the room right now.
I just feel a presence, sort of a metaphysical presence. It has a sort of PHP flavor to it.
And a CSS flavor.
It does, yeah. So we are joined today by a man we have mentioned many times and like sub-mentioned many times, Adam Wathan.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
I did it wrong, isn't it? Wathan.
Wathan, yep. I don't really bother correcting people. Take your best stab at it. I'll appreciate it, however it comes out. So. The worst I ever get is Wathan. Some people sometimes will call me and think I'm Asian or something, which is...
Dude, I love Adam Wathan.
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome.
Also, the other one I get is Watham. Like, people think my parents would be cruel enough to give me a rhyming name. Like Adam Wathan.
I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, welcome. I'm glad to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I think this is the first time we've had 3 people on the podcast. Is that right, Derrick?
Yeah, I think it is.
All right. Blazing new ground.
Yeah.
So, Adam, I've talked about you a lot, I think. So people might have an idea of who you are, but just in case, maybe give us kind of your quick summary of who you are and what you've been doing.
Sure. So I'm primarily a software developer who does a lot of stuff in the PHP and Laravel space. And for the longest time, I worked for agencies doing client work, sort of similar to the sort of thing that you would have done at Thoughtbot. But over the last year and a half, I was able to go solo working on my own products. So I have a book and video series that teaches PHP programmers how to use sort of some functional programming principles to refactor like loops and conditionals and stuff. And that's kind of what did well enough to let me go out on my own originally. And then I also have a video course on doing TDD with Laravel. So that's kind of what I do for a living. And then I'm also involved in a bunch of other kind of open source and related projects as well. So yeah, that's kind of the summary.
Nice. I was hoping you could maybe walk us through in a little more detail, like take us back to when you were building your first product and how that let you leave your job.
Yeah, sure. So I've kind of wanted to create something and sell it on the internet for a long, long time. But every idea that I would sort of come up with sort of was either too ambitious or intimidating, or, it just seemed like it's going to take forever to do this. It's hard to commit the time when you don't necessarily have like an end in sight sort of thing. So a friend of mine who does similar sort of things but in the audio engineering space, I kind of met up with him to talk to him about what he was doing sort of shortly after I noticed that he was being successful with this stuff, just to kind of like pick his brain and find out if he had any advice for anyone who wanted to get into doing the same sort of thing. And what he recommended to me after I explained that, I had a couple of ideas, but all of them just seemed too big to tackle. He suggested just trying to make something that he called the Tripwire product, which I've heard in other spaces, but basically just something really small and cheap that you can sell for like $9 or $10, just to sort of get your feet wet with selling things online and build a little bit of a qualified, audience where these people like care about what you do and are willing to spend money on your stuff. So he mentioned that idea to me, and I had been sort of building a little bit of notoriety on Twitter and the PHP sort of circles for posting all these little refactoring tips related to sort of simplifying loops and conditionals with, collection pipeline operations like map and reduce and filter and zip and each cons and some of the kind of cooler, fancier ones that are a lot more common for people to use in languages like Ruby or JavaScript with, libraries like Lodash and stuff, but not so common in PHP. So I had been kind of just really getting into this because it was a really fun sort of piece of programming that I was learning and getting better at. So I was just kind of sharing what I was doing and noticing that people started to kind of like get excited about some of the things that I was sharing. So I thought, well, maybe I could make like a little like 25-page PDF that's just like my favorite sort of collection pipeline refactoring tips. And that sounded super tackleable, right? And I thought I could probably do this in like 2 weeks. So I just started kind of hacking on that. And the idea was just to pick a bunch of different examples and just sort of flesh them out and just see where it went. And it took a lot longer than 2 weeks, of course. I think it took me about 3 months eventually. But what was originally planned to be like a 25-page PDF turned into like a 160-page book with like 4 hours of screencasts and a bunch of exercises that shipped with it and stuff. But had I known that that's what I was going to end up making, I probably would have been too intimidated to ever start.
Why did that change happen, by the way? Like what caused it to grow from that small thing to the big thing?
I think it just happened writing it. So I decided I wanted to kind of add a section at the beginning of the book that was sort of talking about fundamentals and sort of explaining how this sort of approach to solving problems just even works in general. You know, the idea of sort of chaining together operations instead of trying to do a bunch of work in a big loop, and sort of explaining how you can extract patterns using anonymous functions. And it just ended up getting to be more in depth than I expected, you know? So by the time I was done with just like the sort of intro section of the book, that was like 30 pages or something, which was bigger than I had planned for the whole thing to be originally. And I had like 15 examples in mind. And then as I was working on the examples, some of those examples were like 15 pages long. So it just turned out to be bigger, than I expected. But it turned into something that I actually am really happy with and really proud of, and feels like a nice sort of complete reference for the sort of things that I wanted to teach. So,
mm-hmm. And I suppose another upside of that is that you ended up creating a pretty in-depth course, and you can price that accordingly.
Yeah, I remember like when I was working on it at the beginning, I was having conversations with people trying to decide if I should charge $9 or $12. And when I eventually released it, I think I had 3 tiers. The lowest one was $29 for just the book, and that was a discounted price. And then $59 for the book plus videos. And then I think $109 or $139 or something for the top tier, which was the book, the videos, plus a SaaS app that I had built that used a lot of those ideas in sort of real world scenarios, just as like an example reference. So I think at the end of the day, my average sale price during my launch was like $70 or $80 per sale, which was pretty awesome considering that was actually higher than both of the lowest 2 tiers. And it was like 8 times higher than what I was originally planning to sell the thing for, when I thought it was going to be some small thing. But yeah, I kind of just, I don't know if I necessarily got lucky there is the right way to say it, but the book was really successful in terms of just how many people purchased it and stuff. And I think I made like 60 grand Canadian or something over the launch, which is enough to kind of make me think, wow, okay, maybe I can do this full time. Like that'll buy me quite a bit of time to work on something else. And I had wanted to do this testing course for the longest time, but that was the idea that just seemed like unsurmountable to me, especially while I was working full time. So I thought, I'm probably not going to get a better chance than this one to try and work full time on this other product and see what I can do with that. So I decided to, instead of just letting that money slowly vanish from my bank account on various home repairs and annoying things like that, to actually look at it as like, what I'm going to be drawing a salary from while I work on the next thing. And then I was fortunate enough that the next product did really well too. And those things continue to sell, although, things have slowed down since it's like a one-time sale sort of product. But yeah, I'm still, doing fine, sustaining myself, and always kind of looking for the next thing to work on now. So yeah.
I'm curious, Adam, you mentioned that you were drumming up kind of support and buzz via Twitter.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, did you have other channels? Were you collecting email addresses? Were you talking about it on your podcast? What were like the main drivers for people finding out about what you're working on?
Yeah, so I did have a landing page that I put up as soon as I decided that I wanted to create this thing, and pointed people to that from Twitter. And I probably did mention it on my podcast, although I don't really remember if I pushed it too hard there. But Twitter was really the main thing, even just to drive people to the landing page. And then I think I launched to about 1,500 people on the list. So I did try to do everything, by the book in terms of keeping the list up to date. So I'd be sending free samples of things I was working on. I was doing the same thing via Twitter with just like little screenshots of like maybe a paragraph that I was really proud of how it turned out in the book or whatever, or like a little screenshot of a code example. But I would send out full free chapters to the list or free videos by the time I had gotten a lot of that stuff done. I think by the time that I had actually launched it, I'd probably given away over half the contents of the book for free to the list. But it wasn't in any sort of sequence or anything, so it's not like anyone could just sign up and get all that stuff. It's only if you were there from the beginning that you would have sort of collected that stuff over time. So I did kind of your typical approach where, you let everyone know what the release date is going to be a week in advance or whatever. Send an email a couple days before again saying, here's all the information, here's what the packages are, here's what the prices are, here's what goes into everything. And then on launch day at like 7:30 in the morning or something, because I was too eager to be able to wait any longer, I just sent out a broadcast email to everyone saying, here's a sales page, it's available. And then my phone just like dinged constantly, like the whole day. I remember I'd like go take my dog for a walk for 20 minutes and come back and I made $5,000 sort of thing, which was pretty cool. So that still stands out to me as like one of the craziest, most like exciting days of my life. So even though my second product did a lot more in revenue, the first one, it's just the first time I'd ever sold anything online like that, right? And just this feeling of just sitting there and people are buying something from you is just like, I don't know, it's crazy. It's hard to explain.
Indeed. Yeah. I recall for a while with Drip and CodeTree having alerts turned on, like push notifications anytime someone signed up for a trial or end up, charging their card for money. And it's just like, yeah, it's this little hit of whatever chemicals and happy chemicals in your brain. And it's just like, it's hard to describe.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. I still haven't turned off any notifications for any of that stuff a year and a half later.
Hey, no judgment.
I remember the first time I sold a screencast to a stranger on the internet for money, and I almost went in panic mode. Like my heart was pounding like crazy. Like it was like this like shot of adrenaline in my body where it's like, oh my God, I can't believe it's working. This thing is actually happening.
Yep. Yeah. And there's also, for me at least, there was an element of, oh my God, I hope these people actually like this thing. They've given me their money now, and I'm like on the hook in some way for like being worth their money. And it's kind of intimidating and scary in a lot of ways. But at the end of the day, everyone ends up, being satisfied with it and loved it. And it was fine. But yeah, it is a scary thing to take somebody else's money and give them something that you made as if anything you could ever make is worth someone's money. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, that is difficult. And like also you have effectively created a relationship with them.
Totally.
How quickly did you start work on your second course after that first one launched?
I think I launched the book on the second or third week of May last year. And then I started working on the course in July or August. Took a little bit of a break and worked on some open source projects and stuff there. So I started working on the course towards the end of the summer, and then launched it in early access in November.
Do you feel like you took some big lessons away from the first launch that you rolled into the second course, the TDD course?
I think the main thing that I took away, like the one thing that sticks out, is for the book, I only had a 3-day launch window. So I think I launched it on like a Wednesday morning or something, or maybe a Tuesday, and the sale ended on Friday. And sales were still coming in really, really fast up until the end of the day on Friday. But I had announced that that's when it was going to end. So I felt obligated to just turn off the sale price. And then all of a sudden sales stop. And it's like, I literally just like turned off a money fountain for no reason. So after that, I kind of like panicked a little bit and tried to figure out different ways to sort of keep that sale going, either by emailing the list and being like, hey, I decided to extend it a little bit because some people have been emailing me saying, oh, I missed out on the thing. I was going to buy it early this week, or I had to get approval from my boss or whatever. But it still felt kind of crappy to sort of go back on my word in any way. It just made me feel like a liar or something. So the main lesson that I took away there was just to not make my launch window like artificially short for no reason at all. So I kind of did like the total polar opposite of that for my testing course. And I just kind of released it, said this is the early access price, because I kind of pre-sold it in a sense. Like I opened it up for sale before all the content was ready. There was still like 40 videos and like 6 hours of content by the time I released it. So people were probably, it's gonna, you're not gonna get through it by the time I haven't released the rest of the stuff. But yeah, I just kept it at that price forever while I was working on the content, and only actually recently took that out of that sale price towards the end of this summer. I think maybe like August I raised the price, or September, because it's been a really long slog putting this thing together. I was right to be intimidated by the amount of work originally. But yeah, that ended up working a lot better for me. I feel like I didn't artificially limit any sales or anything. I'm trying to think if there's any other real strong lessons that I took away from it. I think that's the only thing that I can look back at and say I did wrong and I would like to do differently. I think the other thing that I took away from it was just sort of how valuable it turned out being to do all the stuff, quote unquote, right, that I had learned from reading from people like Nathan Barry and stuff like that, about how he has had successful product launches, and just the importance of collecting emails, the importance of keeping your list updated, the importance of sending out free content, and just sort of keeping people, aware that you're working on something, as well as, having a launch discount at all, versus a lot of people will just put something out at a price and not even think about this stuff, right? That's like a really low hanging fruit, obviously. Or things like pricing tiers. Like I said, my average sale price was like $70 or $80, and the middle tier was $59 at launch. And so if I had only made it a book or something, I think I would have made like 30% total the amount of revenue that I added by being able to add, I think it was like 15 screencast examples, and then this code base that I already had, which was my sort of example thing. So that wasn't really any extra work besides just sort of going through and cleaning it up a little bit and making sure it was in a good state to just kind of share with the world. But yeah, that being said, I didn't do tiered pricing on my second product, only because I released it early, and it felt weird to have like 3 tiers or something where no matter what tier you bought, you'd be getting the same content to start, because the way I would have sliced it would have been, maybe there's the first X videos that cover sort of the fundamentals are included in the base package, and then there's like more advanced stuff layered on towards the end, right? And none of that stuff would have been done towards the end. So what I decided to do is just sell the whole thing, basically assuming that this would have been the top tier. Like that's the only tier that I made available. And then after that, I just realized, well, there's no point in adding these cheaper tiers because people have been totally happy to pay this price anyways. So I probably could have, or could still, add additional higher tiers on top of that. But it ended up working out okay. I think like the lesson I learned there was just never tier down, only tier up, because it ended up working out fine. So
you mentioned like there's 40 videos and you're working on it for a few months. And I think we, as people just we're all guilty of this from time to time of underestimating the amount of effort that goes into something like this. Did you ever find yourself in kind of like a pit of despair where you're like, you're deep into building this course out and it's becoming a slog and really difficult to keep moving forward? And did you have any things you did to kind of put power through that?
I can say like there was definitely like a moment of panic, because I actually announced a release date for the course probably like it must have been like maybe 4 weeks beforehand, because I find for me I really need like a deadline to really be at my most productive. It's really easy to otherwise feel like you're doing a lot of work but not actually be working on things that are making a difference. I don't know, it's just really easy to fill your day with stuff that isn't actually getting you closer to the finish line. But as soon as like you have a deadline, the amount of clarity that brings is kind of crazy, right? So I did that, and then, probably a week before it was supposed to be released, I was like, wow, like there's no way that I'm going to have this done in a week, because every single lesson that I plan that I expect to be a 20-minute video ends up being like 5 or 6 15-minute videos or something. Because I just keep finding that I have more to explain or more to show. And the way I kind of structured it, it was like basically documenting building a production application from scratch with TDD, which I think I still am really happy that I kind of took that approach, because I don't think there's a lot of other stuff out there. There's a lot of, here's how mocking works, or here's how to test this, or here's how to test this. But there's not a lot out there just showing you, okay, we have a blank editor and we want to write this new project and we want to do it with TDD. So what's the very first test we write? I think there's a lot of things that you're not going to learn unless you watch someone making decisions and refactoring code and going back and fixing things that, now this design is, not going to support this new feature. So how do we go and accommodate this new feature using TDD? There's just all sorts of workflow things that I think you would never be able to fit into something that was just purely organized by different testing topics or something. But it ends up making the whole thing like immensely longer than you ever could have anticipated. So, basically, I would be working hard on something and everything would just be 4 times as much effort as I thought. So I just wasn't as far as I wanted to be by the time that I planned to launch it. And I had to kind of make a decision. Do I still launch it on that day, or do I just delay the launch? And delaying things sucks, because it sucks to email people and say, hey, this is the date that it's going to be out, and then not deliver on that. So I talked to a bunch of people and got some opinions, and decided, okay, let's release it early. We'll call it like early access, and I'll say like, there's going to be new lessons coming constantly until the whole thing is done. And that ended up working really well. But the thing that I needed to do after that, because that deadline was now gone, right? I still had this sort of like impending pressure to deliver for people who had purchased the course, where I needed to, deliver the rest of the content. But what I found really helped there was just kind of keeping in touch with my customers and emailing them every week saying, here's the new lessons, and sort of mentioning what I was planning on next, and sort of giving micro deadlines there as well. Like, next week, we're going to be covering this stuff. And it was still hard to keep up with that, new module every week a lot of the time. So sometimes I would, it'd be maybe 2 weeks, sometimes 3 weeks before I'd get something out, because the amount of stupid things that take up your time when you work for yourself that you don't think about is brutal. Like right now, I am behind on submitting my sales tax to the government, which I have to go and export a bunch of data and figure out which customers came from Canada and which postal codes they're from, which results in different tax rates, and figure out there's just all this crap that just takes days of work all the time, constantly. That gets in the way of things. So you never have as much time to work on things as you want. But yeah, setting these kind of micro deadlines and keeping in touch with people, and just being really public and open about everything, I find really helps me. I really can't say to someone, hey, I'm going to email you videos on Friday, and then not do it, So that has really helped me kind of keep that momentum going on bigger projects, just sort of slicing it up into smaller things that you can make smaller promises for, and then just, having other people keep you accountable, whether that's through what you guys do on this podcast, talking to each other every week about what you're working on, or by literally promising a customer that you're going to have new lessons recorded for them on a certain day. So that's definitely the thing that's helped me the most there.
Something interesting I noticed about your courses, Adam, is that typically with products like these one-time purchases, you see a giant spike during the early launch, and then they drop off a cliff and go to, not quite zero, but maybe close. And it seems like you've been doing this for a while, and it seems like you have a pretty strong, like, sustained sales for these courses. And to me, it seems like you take on these courses and you make them definitive. To me, like, I feel like there may as well be no other TDD in Laravel course that exists, because yours is so comprehensive, so well known, so thorough, and so you just become like the answer to how do you learn this thing. And so you're paying this huge time penalty of like that course took a long time to make, but you're seeing this like sustained sell through afterwards. Would you agree with that?
I wouldn't completely agree. That's actually still like an area of my business that I really want to work on improving. I still do get like. So with my book, I probably get about like $2,000 a month in sales from that still, which broken down day by day isn't really a lot. Like, there's a lot of days where there's no sales, and then there's maybe a day where there's 2, or whatever. So maybe I get like a couple $100 check every week from Gumroad or whatever. But when you look at that on a monthly basis, it's like, okay, well, that's like my mortgage plus all my expenses just from this product that I have. So that's cool, right? It is more than it sounds like. But yeah, it did definitely drop off huge after the launch, and the book sales continue to slow down because I don't really have anything in place to sort of drive traffic there or keep people excited about this topic or anything. With the testing course, I think what worked the best for me there was because I had pre-released it, I still kept doing stuff on Twitter, like when I was working on the next lessons, So by still working on the thing, you have an excuse to keep talking about it, which was one advantage over releasing it finished. So when it's finished, the only thing you have to say about it is, hey, I still have a book that you can still buy. And you just kind of look like a sleazy salesman or whatever. But if you're still actively working on something, it's really easy to share that with people without feeling like all you're trying to do is like get a sale. If I really try to work on projects that I'm excited about, that I think are really cool. You know what I mean? So when I am working on a lesson for the testing course or something, I'm genuinely excited about like the ideas that I'm teaching there. So it's easy for me to try and summarize some cool element of it and share that on Twitter. And feel like even though that is marketing my course and helping me run my business, I'm also just doing it because like I like sharing cool stuff on Twitter, you know what I mean? And people like get value from it. It's not like here's a little teaser that's not valuable on its own. I try to, help people in public with free stuff where you don't need to buy the course to get the value from whatever information I'm sharing. But by continuing to work on the thing, you have more ideas for these sorts of pieces of value that you can sort of share with the world. But yeah, sales have slowed down for the testing course too. And I have some ideas for how to improve that, hopefully. But I think, fundamentally at the end of the day, there's always still going to be that little piece of, keeping it up to date so you can keep talking about it without looking like you're just trying to sell some old stuff. It needs to feel active. And I think that's what I've learned the most. That, and then I really need to do some work on just making sure that people have a reason to even find this site. I've been lucky that I have a big audience of people who already trust me and want to learn from me. That has worked out really well for me, but I don't have much in place to optimize for people who find my stuff because they're interested in what I'm teaching, but don't already know who I am or don't already trust me from something else, So I think I need to do a better job of putting some things out there that are kind of optimized for cold traffic, where if someone can come to the site because they're interested in learning about testing with Laravel, I want to be able to do a better job of helping them to TDD with Laravel without having to buy the course right away, because that's sort of the relationship that I have with my existing audience, right? So,
that makes sense. So I want to talk about Tailwind.
Sure.
I'm excited about this. So you seem to be a man of many projects, and this is the latest and
Too many
exciting
projects.
one.
Yeah. What do you want to know?
Do you want to throw out the pitch for Tailwind?
Sure, I can throw out
why should people be interested?
Okay, so Tailwind CSS is a utility-first CSS framework, which is sort of a term that I made up, but I can explain it in a little bit more depth if anyone's interested. But it's a framework for people who have some sense of design skills or CSS skills and want something that's going to help them build custom user interfaces faster. So the biggest issue that I see with other frameworks out there like Bootstrap and stuff is they do a great job of helping people who don't really know like what they want to do with a design, and they sort of want to be able to choose from a menu of sort of pre-designed, pre-configured components to sort of put together a user interface. But if you're working with a design team or you're a designer and you're trying to implement something totally custom, you spend like so much time just fighting with the defaults or overriding styles or trying to figure out which variables you need to tweak to get something to look the way you want. And it's just not like a really great experience. So Tailwind provides a bunch of low level CSS abstractions for just directly manipulating things like borders and background colors and fonts and text colors and text sizes and stuff to make it really easy to compose sort of custom user interfaces directly in your markup. And then what makes it sort of unique versus some of the other frameworks out there that take that same approach, like there's other frameworks like Tachyons that are these functional CSS frameworks that are built on these low-level utilities. But we provide this whole layer of like additional tooling to help you sort of create abstractions around some of these repeating patterns in your markup and extract components and stuff, which is just kind of like a workflow that I've used in CSS for the longest time. So it's been really fun to sort of try and encode this into like a framework that is as much a tool as it is like a way of approaching how you build things in the browser. So that's kind of the high level pitch at sort of an abstract place, but that's been a really fun project to be working on for the last few weeks. I've been working on it really, really hard because again, we sort of promised like that we would put it out publicly in the fall, and fall is quickly disappearing. I guess fall doesn't actually technically end till like December 20th or something, which it certainly doesn't feel like fall by December 20th where I live. But
yeah, same.
So that's kind of what I've been working on lately, and happy to talk about any more of the interesting details. Sometimes what's hard with projects like this is when you're really deep into something, it's hard to see it from sort of an outside perspective and know like what is interesting or what am I assuming somebody else knows? You know what I mean? I'd love any questions you have about what's not clear or what you're wondering about it.
I have some questions because this is something that I've gradually kind of given up control of the CSS code base in Drip over to our design team. I find us today using basically like a BEM convention or BEM, however you say it. But I also see from time to time our designers throwing in more and more utility classes. So I see a mix of like, just throw this class on to add a certain amount of padding below an element or something like that. Since you say utility first, is the idea that you start styling your interface using predominantly utility classes, and then when it becomes time to basically refactor your styles, then you kind of extract those utilities into like a higher level class that encapsulates all the different properties for that component? Or okay. Or I wasn't sure if it was like always use utilities and never abstract them into like a higher level class, or
there's sort of two ways of thinking about that. So some of the other frameworks out there that take the same sort of low level abstraction approach will tell you that if you want to so the biggest thing that people see with this approach, right, is they see like these super long class lists in their HTML, and a lot of time they see like repeating class lists. So if you're building a button and you have no button class, and the button is literally composed of classes like BG blue, border blue dark, text white, text bold, horizontal padding this size, vertical padding this size, and you have to use that same button in 50 places in your interface, copying and pasting that list of classes is going to like set off your duplication maintainability alarms pretty quick, right? Because if you want to update the style of that button, you don't have a single place to update it anymore. So the solution that's proposed by a lot of other frameworks is to sort of handle that in your templating layer, right? So if you're building like a React app or something, well, maybe you make like a button component in React and you put all these utility classes in that component, but then everywhere else in your app, you're just dropping in that button component, so you're not actually repeating those classes. I think that's totally an awesome approach. I don't think it's practical for everybody. Like it seems like a bit of a leap to say to use the CSS framework, you must also templatize every single element of your user interface. That's a big leap for people to take, in addition to embracing this like 11 classes on every element in your HTML thing, So we provide tooling with Tailwind to make it easy to say, okay, I've used this combination of classes 3 times now to make this same button. I want to be able to edit that from one place. And Tailwind is written as a post-CSS plugin, so we add sort of custom rules into CSS that we sort of transform back into regular CSS as part of the build chain. But what we let you do is basically take that list of classes, copy it, paste it into your CSS in like a button component class, so like a .btn class. You use this custom @ rule we have called @apply. So say @apply and paste this list of classes that you took out of your HTML. And those are going to just be dumped in just like a Sass mixin would, where just literally copy and paste those values into that component. And then you can replace any instances of those repeating patterns in your markup with that component. The thing I think is really powerful about this utility first approach is that it really does a good job of preventing premature optimization. So there's so many situations in a user interface where traditionally using like a BEM style approach, you'll create a component for something even though you only ever use that component once in the whole app. So like an example that always comes to mind for me is like a nav bar. You're never repeating the markup for a nav bar in an app usually, right? You have some sort of layout file. So that's already handled in like the template layer. So even if that appears on every single page, you're usually just extending some layout, right? So creating a component for a nav bar, a lot of time is a waste of CSS because like that's not saving you any duplication because that list of utility classes would have only appeared one place in your project. But with something like buttons or form controls or things that you do want to like use in a bunch of different places, I'm using this sort of utility first approach. If you compose that out of utilities originally, you can just sort of keep an eye on like, when am I copying and pasting something from another page? Well, am I worried that like I'm going to want to change both these things at the same time? Well, now I create an abstraction out of it. You know, it's the same way you work in like regular programming backend code. You know, you don't necessarily like create functions for something that never gets reused or create an abstraction around something. But in CSS, the tendency has always been this premature abstraction approach where you're trying to define a component before you even know that it's ever going to get reused. So this workflow has worked really well for me in terms of keeping that balance between keeping the CSS sort of small-ish, like it's not a tiny framework. Like I think Tailwind default configuration is like 27 kilobytes minified and gzipped, which is totally reasonable, especially if you look at what happens to projects at scale otherwise. But it keeps your CSS sort of low churn, you know? So you're not adding new CSS every time you add new UI. You're only adding new CSS when you want to prevent duplication, basically.
Yeah, I really like that. I feel like it's something, I rarely see CSS refactored. And I feel like this is almost something you don't necessarily feel the pain when a project is small, but as soon as you have a really large application where you have lots of different components and probably a good chunk of them are used only once, then I could see this like you've got bloated CSS files, you've got, and if you're just constantly adding components and never refactoring, then it can become quite unwieldy. And I have kind of seen that progression happen now in Drip, that it's a really mature application. Then if you're not focusing on things like your level of specificity in your CSS, and you've got, some folks who take a different approach with nesting classes inside of each other and others who don't. And so I really like the fact that this gives you basically a path for like start with utilities. And then I think the refactoring step probably is important, because if someone is just always copying and pasting the long chain of utility classes, then that seems like a code smell. But it is an obvious one. Like as soon as you've copied this multiple times, then here's the path forward for that. So.
Totally. And you're actively copying and pasting it, right? So it's impossible to not notice that you copy and pasted it. Although there are situations where maybe you are creating a button style from scratch and not realizing that, wow, this is like very similar to this other button, except for it's got one small, slightly different thing. Does that really need to be different? Like, should I just reuse the styles from the other one and maybe create a component? Or maybe it does need to be different, which then gives you a sense for what should actually be in a button component, right? So another thing that's really helpful about this approach, in my experience, is if you have like repeated utilities in a bunch of different places, but maybe one of them also has a box shadow and the other two don't, it's really easy to see, okay, I shouldn't include the box shadow in the component. I can layer the box shadow on top of it as like an additional utility. CSS I think of as like a very additive language. Like you really want to avoid overriding styles or undoing styles. If you ever have like a button that has like a style baked into it that's somewhere else in your UI, you want to use that button but remove one piece of it. In my opinion, it's better to remove that from the button completely, and everywhere else in the UI, like say you have 12 buttons and 11 of them look the same except for this one which would have had to undo a style on the other ones. I would rather add a utility to 11 of those buttons to add that one extra thing than try and undo it in the other thing, because I think that's what leads to a lot of maintainability issues when you
just throw an important on it, right?
Yeah, you could do that too. I mean, I think like the biggest problem that happens with CSS on teams, especially if like you're new to a project that you haven't worked on before, is CSS is global, right? So you never know when editing CSS what you might be changing in a part of the app that you've never even seen or never even thought that this could be affecting. So what people always do, or at least what I've always done, and maybe you guys can tell me if this sounds familiar, is you sort of try and carve out your own corner in the CSS in a way where like, okay, I know that whatever I add here is not going to be messing up anyone else's stuff because I've added specific classes to my HTML that no one else has ever used yet. And I know that it's like safe to change this without affecting anybody else's stuff. And when you have to take that approach to writing CSS because you're expected to write CSS to style things, well, then your CSS file is just going to grow and grow and grow and grow forever. So by doing things in the markup instead, you have this reusable set of utilities. And if I apply those utilities to some element in the markup, well, of course, that's not going to affect anything else on the site because they're just directly applied to that one piece, right? So,
wow, makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
It's a tricky thing to convince people is a good idea. I wrote a blog post a few months ago that I really tried to explain sort of my journey from sort of the CSS Zen Garden approach to writing CSS. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that site, where the idea is, you know, any document should be able to be drastically restyled just by throwing like a different style sheet on it. So you want your HTML to be like completely unaware of the fact that it's being styled in any way. Sort of my journey from writing CSS that way, which sounds so logical when you're learning, to like the way I approach things now, which is completely different. And I think the light bulb moment for me was realizing that when people talk about like separation of concerns in HTML and CSS, right, the idea is that separation of concerns means your HTML doesn't know anything about the presentation and all the presentation goes in the CSS. The reality is like there's not really a separation of concerns. It's more about the direction of your dependencies. So when you write CSS that way, you have HTML that's completely independent and doesn't depend on anything and has no knowledge of the outside world. But you have CSS that's very specifically crafted to kind of slither its way through this document you've created and style things, you know what I mean? Because it has to sort of know about the structure of it to pinpoint the elements that it wants to style without a bunch of classes and stuff. The approach that I take now, I feel like is sort of the inversion of that, where your CSS has literally no knowledge of the app that you're building because it doesn't even have classes for things like sign up form, you know what I mean? Everything is very content agnostic. It's just about presentation. So that CSS is completely portable and can be used to style any document, but the HTML has to be aware of the CSS, right? So it's just sort of inverting that dependency. So you can either write CSS that can be used everywhere, or you can write HTML that can be styled by any style sheet, you know what I mean? You have to sort of pick one of those for your circumstances. And I find more often than not, you want reusable CSS more than you want restylable HTML.
Mm-hmm. I feel like that's a bit of a more honest take. Like I remember that CSS Zen Garden back in the day when I was first learning about CSS, and it was like, you know, the whole notion of semantic HTML and separation of concerns and all that. Like I never was able to actually do a project where that was truly, like, it truly worked out that way. Where like I usually found myself positioning markup, like the order of divs in a container usually affected how it looked. You know, I wasn't able to just drop, you know, divs and other semantic elements on the page without any thought about how it's going to be presented. Like, so you really are thinking about presentation when you're crafting your markup, which does seem to suggest that maybe you should be, yeah, like genericizing your CSS as opposed to trying to genericize your HTML markup.
Yeah, I think the other thing is like we're not writing documents really on the internet anymore. We're building user interfaces, right? And if you look at any other sort of user interface, you know, tool in other sort of ecosystems, and I mean like WinForms, for example, if you're making like an old Windows desktop app, the notion that laying out the interface and like controlling how the interface looks should be separate doesn't even make any sense at all. Like that's just not how it works in any other environment. Like you're building an interface, which is how something looks and feels and works. It's not a document that you're styling. Like there are use cases for that with HTML, right? Like I'm sure there's lots of situations you can think of, like Markdown or LaTeX or something. There's all these examples of documents that you want to be able to apply different themes and styles to and stuff. But for the sorts of things that, web application developers are working on, it's entirely different. You're building real user interfaces. So
makes a lot of sense.
This is how I feel when I talk to you, Adam. Is I feel like you just keep saying things that make sense. And I just go, all right, I guess I have to agree with that. So Tailwind is freshly out. People can go use this now, right?
Yeah, we released we called it like the first alpha or whatever, beginning of last week, which is 0.1.0. And we're up to like 0.1.6 now with a bunch of different tweaks and changes and stuff. It's been really crazy, the response to it, honestly. I think we're at like 2,500 or 3,000 GitHub stars or something already. I even had like a mailing list for the CSS framework, which is kind of like crossing the streams between like the marketing world and the the open source world. But yeah, it's been going awesome. Like people have already started like registering domains. Like someone created tailwindexpo.com, which is like a bunch of examples of Tailwind sites people have already launched, even though the thing has only been out for a week. It's still changing pretty rapidly, but we're trying to be careful we're trying to make it stable enough that people can actually use it on stuff, because that would be a bummer if we kept breaking it for people. But also trying to make sure we still have the liberty to improve it in ways that may be resulting in breaking changes. But yeah, so far so good. It's been really fun and exciting to work on. It's definitely the biggest, most active open source project I've sort of been responsible for. So we'll see where it goes. We got a lot of ideas for directions we want to take it in, and other things that we want to add. But yeah, I don't know. I wish there was a way to get paid to work on open source that was dependable, because I was talking about this with someone yesterday. This is like the most fun I've ever had working on something that impacts like the largest amount of people and like the fastest way, like this might be like the thing that I make that is of the most value to the most people, but somehow there's no way for me to like be able to sustain providing that value full time for people, which just seems like a really disappointing situation. So
I'm sure you've thought of courses around Tailwind.
I sort of have, but it's a tricky thing because I don't really know who all is using it and like what struggles they would actually have. And it also just kind of feels like I want to make this thing because I'm excited about it and I want people to use it. And something about like announcing a course for it 2 weeks after just feels kind of like, oh, so that's why he made the CSS framework, which is totally not true at all, right? But if that's like the angle that has to be taken to like sustain it and make it something that I could be able to spend more time on, I think people would probably be able to get behind that. So.
Awesome. Well, it's been great talking to you. This is one of our longer episodes, but I think it was a good one.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Time flies for sure when you're doing these things.
Yeah, I could keep talking for like for another hour, but being mindful of our listeners' time.
Thanks for coming by, Adam. I appreciate it. It's good talking to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I've been listening to the podcast since it was still the Giant Robots podcast, and before Derrick was on there, and for years and years and years. So it's awesome to be able to be a guest on this show.
If you'd like to access the show notes for this episode, you can go to artofproductpodcast.com. Thanks for listening.